Turning now to AI, huge development here in Washington. Let's go ahead and put this up here on the screen. President Trump says he will now issue an executive order to preempt any state in the United States from passing individual AI regulation. There must be only one rule book if we are going to continue to lead in AI. We are beating all countries at this point in the race, but that won't last long if we're able to have 50 states, many of them bad actors involved in rules and the approval process. There can be no doubt about this. AI will be destroyed in its infancy. I will be doing a one rule executive order this week. You can't expect a company to get 50 approvals every time they want to do something. That will never work. And this is part of a huge campaign in Washington over the last couple days. So let me just zoom out and explain a little bit. So first of all, he had multiple attempts in the Congress to try and to put this AI preemption in the bill. Multiple in the NDAA, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. That actually failed at every level. Individual congressmen and even Republicans who initially had tried to put that in were like, oh, we're getting a lot of constituent pushback on this. And there are actually a lot of red state governors called their delegation. They're like, hey, I don't want this, in the bill. So they push that away. The fact that they weren't able to get it in the NDAA, an executive order, is actually the worst thing for them because it means it, of course, can be rolled back and it can be challenged in the court system. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort by the AI companies going to the White House and making their case. You've had multiple visits. Christmas party season is always fun for watchers here in D.C. The number of the big tech guys who've been at the White House over the last few days is crazy. Sergey was here just a couple of days ago. You had Greg Brockman at OpenAI. You had Jensen. You had Sundar Pichai. You had every player in Sam Altman. Every major player has been at the White House in the last 10 days. This is their number one priority. And David Sachs, who's the White House AI czar, has kind of been the spearhead of this. Let's go and put this up here on the screen. This is his explanation, and he's, I guess, the father of the policy. He says, one rule book for AI. I want to share a few thoughts on AI preemption and address some of the concerns. First of all, this is not AI amnesty or AI moratorium. It's an attempt to settle a question of jurisdiction. When an AI model is developed in state A, trained in state B, inference in state C, delivered through the internet, that is clearly interstate commerce, exactly the type of economic activity the framers intended to reserve the federal government to regulate. In the absence of preemption, 50 different states will assert their jurisdiction, creating a patchwork of 50 different regulatory regimes. He says, for example, states like Colorado, California, and Illinois have made AI developers liable if their models contribute to algorithmic discrimination, which is defined as disparate impact. Colorado's list of protected groups includes English language proficiency, so presumably it's against the law for AI models to criticize illegal aliens. This is the type of ideological meddling of how we ended up with, quote, Black George Washington. So he's making a cultural argument here. He says only a federal framework can achieve this goal. The attempts of red states to protect conservatives from bias and discrimination will have limited effectiveness when blue states like California have the most market power and a nexus to AI development. We can't afford any of this. So he says we will have preemption, but there will still be an application for child safety, for community, for creators, and for censorship. Now, the thing is, though, again, and this is actually kind of the problem, is that they're trying to do this through EO is the worst possible way. Because everything he said is not technically wrong to me. Like, I don't think he's wrong about the interstate commerce. I think that what he's talking about, communities, creators, censorship, an executive order is the worst way to accomplish that. It's not actually the law. And it doesn't mean that we had a full-on debate, a democratic debate in the United States Congress and more to settle some rules around this because they're not technically incorrect. Like we should have federal standards in the same way that we do the internet or any of these things like the Child Safety Act, right? What we should have is a very specific major debate in this country about these models, their effects, their liability, what, guardrails that we're going to have in place, what can we all agree on? The suicide one it keeps me up at night because how many people are using this as a mental health proxy? We have a loneliness crisis. You have 800 million people or whatever using ChatGPT. If just 1% of them are crazy, that's millions of people, and they're using this to assist them. I'm not saying it's ChatGPT's fault, although, it gets kind of sketchy whenever you live in countries where there's assisted suicide is legal, but they have no qualms. It's in the hands of Sam Altman. And that's why, ultimately, I actually would fall back on state regulation because right now it's Wild West. And that's actually, again, in the era of exponential growth And that's everything they tell us is exponential. It's getting better, it's getting better. And in this time, we do not have time to dilly-dally. Like the next time that a Congress could potentially solve this issue, or at least some issue, is what, 2029? Like that's an eternity in AI math,
yeah.
right?
Well, and in fact, we did have a Democratic debate, and that's why legislators realized, oh,
right, not
people
to pass it.
do not
Great point.
want this.
Great
they
point,
don't
actually.
want the federal government to preempt all of the states. They actually want the states to be able to have some control here. And I mean, this is the good part of the laboratory of democracy. You have 50 different states. They can take different approaches. They can try to figure this thing out. Who among us has confidence that this government, which is 100% bought and compromised and shot through with these tech oligarchs, is going to do a good job regulating this extraordinarily existentially dangerous technology? Zero people should have confidence in that. The only people who like this direction are people, frankly, like David Sachs, who have a vested financial interest in pushing in this direction and having no regulation whatsoever. That has been the thrust of this administration from the jump. From the jump, any sort of regulation that was in place from the Biden administration, which was limited but did exist, that gets rolled back. These guys have gotten everything they wanted. That is why I say the main project, not to say there isn't a lot else going on that has consequences and is bad and all the rest, but the main project of this administration is pushing unregulated, off to the races, Wild West AI, and hoping and praying that it isn't a complete fucking disaster. And guess what? The public is not on board. That's why you couldn't get this through the Congress. That's why you have to do it through an executive order. That's why there's backlash, not just from Democrats who hate you anyway, but from Republicans who are saying, wait a second, we're not comfortable with this either. We're not comfortable with it in the short term. We're not comfortable with it in the long term. No Sam Altman, no David Sachs, no Mark Andreessen, no Peter Thiel. No, we don't trust you to do this in an ethical and responsible way that is ultimately going to provide more benefit than harm for the American people. So that is why they have ended up doing this executive order, because even people in the Congress, and many of, if not most of them, are getting money from Silicon Valley and are basically bought off by these guys. But even with that landscape, they said, no, we cannot put this in. The backlash and the consequences are too severe. That was actually democracy, and that's why it's so much of a problem, the way that this president has tried to consolidate so much executive power. And of course, he's not the first, but like with everything, he takes it to the next level. And why it's such a problem that in many instances, the court has allowed him to do that, whether through directly ruling on his executive power grabs, or at the Supreme Court through the shadow docket, where they said, well, we're not going to rule now, but you can go ahead and keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, in this instance, blocking the regulation at the state level and go about your merry way. Well, we take our good old time figuring out how we're going to ultimately handle this thing.
Yeah, and this is also like a real ideological war. So like for David, I mean, in terms of his, like I like David, he's, you know, I've been friends with him pretty open about this. Him and I have a very different view on the AI question. In terms of like his own financial interest, I actually think he's a libertarian, and he kind of always has been. And that's really the fundamental ethos of a lot of the people who are in the White House. Like for example, David, I mean, he's always been kind of a foreign policy dove, but he is majorly behind working with Jensen Huang and NVIDIA right now to loosen a lot of these current restrictions. So for example, can we put B7 up here on the screen? This is by far one of the most consequential things on the AI front. And if you put this together with the AI moratorium or the EO, that it totally makes sense. Trump says, I have informed President Xi of China and the US will allow NVIDIA to ship its H200 products to approved customers in China. The H200, one of the more advanced chips in the NVIDIA arsenal, major reasons not to do it, right? Which is basically handing China the one last piece that the US has in terms of our AI competitiveness. Now, the NVIDIA David Sachs argument is that by having them use the chips, they are reliant, they won't create their own. It's not a bad argument, but let's explain a little bit about what that means. In the interim, though, it means NVIDIA gets to keep printing a shit pot of money, and that's good for their stock. Now, again, like in David's kind of more libertarian ideology and all of this, one of the things that David has consistently said is we're the backbone of the US economy. And they're not wrong. Now, I think that that's a bad thing. That's kind of my criticism of the Trump administration is that this rocket fuel to the AI industry is good for the short term, not good for the long term because of a potential bubble bust going all in with huge amounts of GDP, stock market gains, vastly concentrated inside of this. It makes it so that these people are becoming fantastically wealthy, but we all may get fantastically poor if this shit doesn't work out and if it does work out. That's part of the problem.
Yes, exactly.
And,
yes. Damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Let me also just show like the red state opposition here, which we previously have mentioned. Can we put B4 up here on the screen? This is Ron DeSantis. Now he says, I oppose stripping Florida of our ability to legislate in the best interest of the people. A 10-year AI moratorium bans state regulation of AI, which would prevent Florida from enacting important protections for individuals, children, and families. Now, the reason why I think that's important is to show you very specifically, it's not just like a blue-red issue. This is really about, this question of guardrails. And again, coming back to this, the belief of the Sachs Andreessen crew is, yes, by the way, obviously, especially with the Andreessen and some of the other people who are directly invested in this, a lot of this is money, but they're longtime libertarians. A lot of their genuine belief is that the government will come in, it will stifle the industry, and their claim is that this will benefit the open AIs and all of that of the world. The problem to me with a lot of that argument here is that because the tail risk socially and societally of this is so high, it would be genuinely irresponsible to say that we shouldn't have an immediate and a compelling interest in doing something about it. And I understand, yes, that's going to hurt your venture profits and all that, but that's your problem, not mine, right? And that's not our democratic issue. That's part of the reason why ultimately Congress did not pass this. I'm really glad that you said that. The reason why, even with all the pressure from the White House, they were like, I don't know about this, is because they were getting huge pushback from their constituents. And what constituents can feel, I think correctly, is that the benefits to them are not yet as promised, and the costs remain high. So for example, let's go and put B5 up here. I found this in a Financial Times investigation about data power. And if you're watching this, I really want you to sit home and look. I mean, it shows you where in parts of the US, the gap between new data center demand and spare grid capacity is growing. You can see the gap. Look at PJM. Right up there in the top left. Look at the orders of magnitude where the new demand is from the projected capacity in 2030. In almost every grid in the US, projected demand is way higher or is higher than what the projected capacity is. And their argument basically is that this is a good thing for the market. Because the cure for high prices is high prices. This is a long-term libertarian talking point. What they mean by that is that high prices, the grid will take that, they will build out more investment infrastructure. But one of the reasons why I thought that the Financial Times piece was so important is if you keep reading, the pathway to building these new natural gas power plants and price, it doesn't keep up with that. And that's natural gas. Look, I'm a huge proponent of nuclear reactors. I'm also going to be honest with you, it takes about 7 years to get this shit online, right?
Yeah.
That's not even close to where that is. So in the interim, that gap, right, the price gap is going to be very painful for all of us. And again, we have to come to terms with what are we getting from this? Their claim, they look at big productivity numbers and all of that. Like, I fundamentally am just rejecting the fact that AI is not the same as the Industrial Revolution or the railroad. The broad aggregate benefits to the everyday citizen is not even close. And the power laws of wealth broadly flow, into the pockets, not just of Silicon Valley, but very specifically Sam Altman, Microsoft, Google, Meta, like the biggest of the biggest. In a lot of ways, these guys are tertiary actors compared to the big 5 companies that are all the way at the top. They're getting much wealthier, and there's not enough, productivity gain across the entire U.S.
I mean, they have a lot of goals with this, but one of the goals is they find it annoying that they have to exist in a society and ever have to deal with government regulation or any sort of democracy, like trimming their sails. So these guys are always looking for a way to exit. And this is their exit. They're like, if my company wins the AI race, then basically I get to say what is what. I get to run the society. I get to have all the wealth. I don't think we are capable of wrapping our head around the amount of power that would consolidate in the hands of a very small number of people, like you could count them on 1 or 2 hands, if one of these companies actually achieves super intelligence that they are all racing towards. So again, this seems like something we should have a massive democratic, like small d democratic, debate about and take very, very seriously. They know that there is increasing push. That's part of why David Sacks is feeling the need to put out some friggin' essay length thing. And I find it disgusting the way he's trying to use this culture war framing of like, oh, that's why you got, Black George Washington. Like, I'm sorry, I don't give a shit about Black George Washington. You guys are trying to take away everyone's jobs and rip up the entire social contract and do it without us being able to even have a say. You want to make it so there's no regulation of the federal government. You've already accomplished that by and large, and ban states from being able to do it on their own. That is the game here. They want an exit from society. I mean, Peter Thiel and these people, they invest in this like Prospera and Honduras, and they want these like crypto, seasteading. They're always looking for a way to be basically like God kings. And they think AI is the answer to that. Now, again, they have other goals as well, but that is a big one to keep in mind. So that's what we're talking about here. The power grid thing, I'm sorry, the argument, the libertarian argument that like, oh, high price will lead them to build out, blah, blah. These are monopolies. No, it won't. No, it won't. What's going to happen is high prices are going to lead to high prices. That's what's happening right now. The grid that is the most strained there and the most, where the demand exceeds the grid capacity the most rapidly and by the most extraordinary amount, it's right here. Why? Because Virginia is the epicenter of all of this data center build out. Now, these things are being built all across the country, but in terms of the hotspot, it is in Virginia.
Per capita, we have the highest.
Yeah, I've told 40% of Virginia's energy capacity already goes to these frickin' things. No one voted for that. No one voted for them for us regular consumers to be shouldering the cost of that. And so what are the benefits, Saagar, that we're getting thus far? What are we seeing? All of this AI slop.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.